Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Global Guardian, Asset Security Trends, Securing Your Business for the Future. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to our panelists by typing your questions into the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording in a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Global Guardian Asset Security President, Andrew Vanderberg. Andrew, take it away.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Kelsey. Just want to start. Welcome to today's webinar. Today's topic will be asset security trends, specifically securing your business for the future. Here's an outline of what to expect from today's webinar. Do simple welcome introductions, a little bit of setting the stage for physical security landscape. How should corporate leaders be preparing, selecting a security provider and technological advancements, key takeaways, and then one of our best parts, we'll have about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. For those who are joining us for the first time and might be familiar with Global Guardian, Global Guardian is headquartered out of McLean, Virginia. We provide Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies, families, family offices, and most recently government agencies with a one-button solution to what we believe is fully comprehensive duty of care, integrated security, medical, and emergency response and intelligence services. My name is Andrew Vanderberg, again, President of Global Guardian Asset Security Division. I will be your moderator today. I'd like to go ahead and present the panelists. First of all, we have Vice President, Director of Corporate Security for Fifth Third Bank. In his career, he has held numerous government positions through the U.S. Secret Service and with the United States Army Force as a captain for 17 years. Thank you for your service. We look forward to hearing from him as we get a fresh corporate security management. Thanks for being on, Frank. We also like to bring up Mark Fowler, who is the president of Robotic Assistant Devices. He has held numerous corporate security positions prior. He will be assisting and adding a fresh technology perspective to the meeting. Glad to have you, Mark. And then last but not least, Dale Buckner, CEO of Global Guardian. He has been leading the Global Guardian since its inception in March 2012. He's a decorated combat commander with multiple combat tours and classified operations to be in Iraq, Afghanistan, Colombia, Haiti, and Cuba, and executed deployments to Russia, El Salvador, Honduras, Chile, Panama, Kuwait, and Qatar. Hand it over to you, Frank, or Dale.
Thank you, Andrew. Next slide, please. So I have just two slides. These are just framework before I hand off to Frank, who's really the practitioner, and Mark here. I don't think it's alarmist to kind of show this slide. This is not a political statement. We don't care about red, blue, Democrat, Republican. None of that matters. We're agnostic to this. I do think if you've watched Global Guardian webinars or have touched us in a certain way, we've been very consistent on this message. Clearly, in the last 3 years, the United States has seen a material increase in crime, specifically murder. It did, as of note, if you look at that very first slide, we finally found the ceiling, if you will, and plateaued to a certain degree. But the last 3 years have been on record, the highest murder rates in the history of this country since we started recording crime stats. And that's not, again, alarmist or exaggeration. It just is what it is. An acknowledgement of that's really important in this space. I think whether it's theft and robbery, murder, assault, carjacking, all of those things have increased materially, which is now affecting families and corporate headquarters in a material way. As you see kind of these snapshots on the photos on the right, these things are real and they're happening. So I think the message to the audience today is we don't want to sound alarmist, but at the same time, we want to be realist. We want to be fact-based. And I think when you look at what's happening in the United States, we've kind of seen this movie before in Bosnia. We've seen this in the Middle East. We've seen this in Central South America. Unfortunately, I'm 54 years old. I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime, but we are in a very different position as a nation, and crime is a factor. And how corporations and how families secure their infrastructure, their offices, their their sites that they're either producing or working from now matter in a way it did not in the past. Next slide. I think you're going to really enjoy both speakers. You know, Frank is a practitioner of everything we're discussing, and I think Mark has a wonderful grasp on the future of technology. Both are very, very important. I think my message to the audience before I hand off to Frank is simply this: you need both. You need cutting edge technology that can take advantage of everything that's going on there. The days of camera surveillance being recorded on a CD in the back room with no one watching is over. There is so much to be done on the tech side. Conversely, technology alone is not going to solve your threat problem. It's just not going to be there. And I think Frank really brings all this together, where he's going to identify the day-to-day, the gritty reality of managing a security force in coherent, you know, with a structure with first responders, and then all of the technology overlaid. But ultimately, I think the message is this: if you think one or the other by itself is going to solve your security problem, we think that's the wrong thesis. We do believe you need both. You need the best of technology combined with the best of policy and the best of an actual response force. And if you're waiting for first responders to solve your problem for you, you're going to be disappointed. So with that, I think you're going to really enjoy both speakers and the messaging of both. Next slide, please. And Frank, take it away, sir.
Thank you, Dale. When Dale asked me to speak, the question he asked me was to talk a little about the design of security at my different sites and different locations, as well as to compare on-site security with remote monitoring, and then come up with a solution of the best model to be used. And when I thought about this, I thought back to my days at West Point, which were, I will say, 25 plus years ago. But I was on faculty at West Point, and as the Air Force liaison officer at West Point, you know, I was pretty proud of the technological advances we've done on the battlefield with stealth technology, and the Navy coming along with the Tomahawk missiles, and to be able to defeat our enemy from quite a distance away to gain that air supremacy over the battlefield. But I was reminded by my colleagues and my fellow faculty members at West Point that in order to hold the ground and to keep it secure, you have to have boots on the ground. And that was the principle that was taught to me. It was true back then, and it's true in the corporate security environment today. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, about how important it is to have those boots on the ground. By doing that, I want to talk about the threats that I face and that we all face out there, the corporate security environment that we live in, and how we have to look at that and put that as part of the equation, and then start talking about the countermeasures that we employ. And I mean, I'm talking more about putting on-site security out there as well as remote monitoring to develop the best model that will work for all of us out there to be the most secure model that we come up with. So with that being said, next slide, please. So I have 33 high density buildings. I have a primary and a backup data center. I have 1,100 plus banking centers, which are actually getting larger as we start our Southeast expansion. So I have different threats at each one of these locations I have to deal with. The one thing that I always keep in the back of my mind is that insider threat or the active shooter. On September 6, 2018, 4 months after I was appointed to this position, we had an active shooter in our lobby. And I learned so much from that situation, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes. But what I did learn is how important it is to keep our employees safe. And to do that, we have to make sure we know who's in our building. So we have access control. We monitor lost or stolen control badges. Obviously, we want to make sure that tailgating or piggybacking doesn't occur. And that's a common problem we have all our locations. If you think about it, someone comes in behind you, they've got a cup of coffee, they've got something in their hands. You want to do the right thing and be polite, you open the door for them. Who do you know you just let into your building? So these are things we're trying to stop to make sure we don't have the situations with people in our building that we don't know who they are. And that's a problem. And I'll tell you how much of a problem it is. We just had a situation, a U.S. Secret Service case at one of our operations centers. The Cincinnati field office did an amazing job at responding to it, investigating it, and it led to the arrest of individuals that were in our controlled area trying to solicit customer information for our employees. So once again, this goes on in the corporate world, is trying to gain advantages and also people out there that don't have the best intentions. So it's important to be able to put your countermeasures in place to protect your high density buildings. At my banks, I'm concerned about robberies and violence and irate customers. I'm having to worry about that. At my data centers, I have to make sure that I protect them against an infiltration, because if that happens, we have exfiltration of data. We've run red team operations in which we've breached our security, gotten into the areas where they need to get into, and then applying a Raspberry Pi to one of these devices and extracting information. Thank God it wasn't successful, but these operations we try every now and then to make sure we can defend ourselves against this type of activity. Next slide, please. So now you've known your corporate, you know what the threats are out there in the corporate world. Now it's time to take a look at your environment that's around you. This is important to know that environment before you start talking about putting in countermeasures. And one of the things we look at is workplace violence cases. If you can see there, there's a total of 1,068 cases. That's a lot. Not just suspicious activity, harassment, threats, but it deals with domestic violence, which we know can come over into the workplace. And that's the one thing we have to be very concerned about, especially when we're looking at active shooters. So we know that's a very big thing, bomb threats. Obviously, we track our bank robbery cases. I'm up to 43 right now so far this year. But I will tell you, we've had about a half a dozen since September 30th. So we do have more cases. And as the holiday seasons come close, we'll probably have more robberies. The big ones that I'm worried about, obviously, are the tier 3 takeovers. Tier 1s are nothing more than an oral or a written demand for money at a bank. Tier 2 is when they either apply or show a weapon. But the tier 3 are the actual, when they actually take out the weapon, go behind the counter. And in one of those cases, they actually took our employees hostage. And it was remediated by a sniper that was able to neutralize the hostage taker, and all the employees were safe. So these are things I deal with. The tag calls or threat assessment group calls, when we have severe situations, we get together as a group to determine what kind of measures to take in place that we need to put in place. And then, of course, you have your handling irate customers. We had 518 cases up till September 30th. A lot of those are call centers, but a lot of them occur at our banks, and they lead to these these assaults that we have at our banks that are going on right now as we speak. We usually get 1 or 2 of them a day. Anyway, with that being said, next slide, please. So we talked about boots on the ground and how important it is to have boots on the ground. Those are your security officers out there. Those are your first responders. And the most important thing to remember about them is when they're out there, they provide that deterrence. I'm going to go back to September 6, 2018. Omar Santaperez, who just had 2 lawsuits dismissed in the Southern District of Ohio courthouse across the street, came to that location on September 6th and reviewed the security over there. He looked in, he saw magnetometers. He saw officers with weapons and bullet-resistant vests. He turned around, walked across our breezeway, sat down in Potbellies for 12 minutes, and then decided to move into our lobby, where he saw unarmed security, no radios, working off of cell phones. I'm sure you could see that. And the quality of the officers I had at the time, I will tell you, didn't meet the standards that I put in place since then. So with all that being said, he began to shoot. He had 100 rounds, over 100 rounds of ammunition, 9mm. He killed 3 of our employees, severely wounded 2, and he was taken out in 4 minutes and 29 seconds by the Cincinnati Police Department. So all in all, a bad day. Whenever you lose employees, could have been a lot worse. But my point that I'm trying to make is he looked at one place and went somewhere else. And the deterrence factor is very important to be able to put out there with your security officers. Just last Saturday, we had a bank rob in Carthage. It was a credit union across the street from a Fifth Third Bank. The Fifth Third Bank had a security officer posted there armed. There are many cases like that. So your security officers being there are a strong deterrent on your sites that remote monitoring can't do, or any other technology doesn't have the same effect of having that person on site. On top of that, they respond to different incidents throughout the building. If we have a fire alarm activation, I don't want to evacuate an entire building, especially my C-suite. I'll have the security guard go to the location, determine what the threat level is, relay it so we can just either ignore it if it's nothing more than drywall dust from a bottom basement construction project, or if it's an actual fire. All types of investigations, they do reports. That's something else they give you that's on site. They also issue temporary badges. They're there to greet people that come in, tours that may go on within your facility. And they're the first people that they'll see when they come through. So they're there to basically establish any exceptions to your access control restrictions. And then you've got, of course, monitoring those control systems. What good is it to have access control if people piggyback through it or hold a door open if you don't have someone there on the spot to put an end to it? And that's what they do for you. They monitor that access control. They oversee it. So in other words, they're there to enforce that access control, to back that up. And then they're just handling on-site things like making sure they do building checks, doing floor walks, making sure your doors are secure, checking the parking lots, escorting employees out to their vehicles, because we've had a lot of violence here in the Cincinnati area and in other areas, especially Chicago. So they do all these things, greeting and patrol the buildings. So those are all the pros with having security officers. Now, get your wallets out, get your checkbooks out, because I'm going to tell you, they're not cheap. I just negotiated a contract with our vendors that provide security. We have two. And the bottom line is this, the rates have gone up and continuing to go up. I have union costs in Chicago, which I have to deal with. And that increases the amount of money that I have to pay for my guards, as well as the fact that I demand that all of my guards either have military background or law enforcement background and a very clean record. As well as that, I look at their appearance, what they look like on duty. So I'm paying for that, but I'm also feeling very comfortable with what they can do for me out there. So with all that being said, I still have to look at some other things that come up every day, which are complaints. The guards aren't where they're supposed to be. They don't show up for work on time. Sometimes they don't show up at all. I have personal behavior violations. Yes, every now and then they take a nap when they're on duty. And we've caught them through remote monitoring capabilities, because we do look at video to check up on them to make sure they're doing their job. Personal cell phones, that's a big thing. I don't know what to do since the cell phones, I don't know what everyone, for some reason, they can't detach that cell phone from their hands. They've always got it there and they're streaming movies. When you're doing that, you're not observing, detecting, reporting, which is what you're supposed to be doing. So that's another personal behavior. These aren't things that are going to happen with remote monitoring. They don't have cell phones, but these are things that you're going to have to worry about when you have humans out there. Turnover rate is 11.4% right now. This quarter, that's not bad, but I lose a lot of people because a lot of my younger security officers have got applications in with police departments, fire departments, and they're hiring right now. So I will lose a lot of them, which means I have to retrain. Obviously, you don't have a turnover rate with a camera. Unless it goes bad on you, have to get a new one. But with the officers, you're going to have that turnover rate. And then we always have to look at the legalities. Now, they have liability on them that is supplied by the vendor, but there's reputational damage that we will incur if something goes wrong. So you have to accept that as a con, is that reputational damage that could occur, and anything above and beyond what their liability insurance would cover. So there's your pros, there's your cons of having boots on the ground. Next slide, please. Remote monitoring. So technology, all the advances we've had in technology gives us the ability to expand our coverage. Now, we look at security cameras and motion sensors 24/7. Well, they don't report late for work. They don't take a nap on duty. They're going. They don't sleep 24/7. They give us records of the evidence of a crime. So whenever I have a bank robbery, we have to supply the evidence, which is the video of the actual robbery taking place, the suspect that comes into the bank, maybe a license plate on a vehicle. These are all picked up on my interior and exterior cameras, which is great. So they do give us the ability to expand our abilities that our humans can't do by being in multiple places over a large surface area. They're also a deterrent to criminals. Since I put exterior cameras on my financial centers, I have seen a reduction at those locations of violent acts as well as bank robberies. There is empirical data that supports that. So that being said, they do act as a deterrent, but they're not going to be as good as a deterrent as an armed security officer at your location. They also help me when I'm trying to substantiate or unsubstantiate allegations. we get allegations of either employees misconduct, theft of services within the buildings, all kinds of instances that come in. I can use that camera coverage where I can move around throughout the buildings remotely and learn what's going on in my buildings. And if people are stealing or going places where they shouldn't be going, I'm going to be able to see that. Whereas a security officer, one person is covering way too much space to be in that position. Now we'll get into access control. Access control is great because I can make sure I know who's coming into my building, when they're coming into my building, and then I can also restrict them to other areas in the building using access control. So that's a great thing. If I had to put a security guard at every single door to every single sensitive area or every entry point in my buildings, I would be out of business. So this gives you the ability to do this. And I think the most important thing too is to be able to track the behavior of your employees. And we'll get a lot of cases referred to us from corporate investigations, also from employee relations. We have misconduct or behavior that should be taking place within the building in one of my 33 high density buildings, and be able to see where they're going, where they're trying to swipe in after hours, or in some cases, we've had theft. Once again, we were able to track that down to badge swipes and put the case together using that and video to be able to put a case together to where we've gotten a confession from the individuals that were conducting the misconduct. And then once again, using that footage to settle disputes and allegations. It's great when I get a call saying, my security officer did this, my security officer did that. I can pull it up, either say, you know what, that's not true. I'm looking at the video, I'll show you the screenshots, or I say, you're right, and we'll take immediate action. It gives the ability to be able to remediate these disputes. So what are the cons out there? What's the cons against remote monitoring? Well, I have 33 high density buildings. There is no way I can cover every inch of those buildings with cameras. I'm going to have blind spots. And if something happens somewhere, I may not have a camera in that location. And that's happened before. And sometimes people that are trying to do harmful things to you, or things that aren't ethical, or things that might be illegal, they review your camera coverage and they don't do them in areas where you have cameras. So there is a drawback to having camera coverage, unless you can put them everywhere. And that's astronomically expensive and probably not prudent to do. And remote monitoring alone, I brought this up earlier. It can't be alone. It cannot be the only thing you have to control access into your building, because it can be circumvented very easily. So if I don't have someone there to stop the piggybacking, if I don't have someone to stop the doors being held open, then obviously the remote monitoring is going to report back to our Bancorp Security Operations Center back here in Cincinnati. They're going to reach out for whoever they would reach out to. If there was no security forces on the premises, they would either call 911 if it's a criminal offense. And now we've got a response time we got to worry about. By then, whatever we were worried about is done. So that's a problem. Remote monitoring can be identify a security deficiency, but they're not going to be able to put the fire out. Once again, getting back to that, you need to have someone on, your first responder on site, your boots on the ground, to respond to that and be able to neutralize that situation, whether it's an active shooter or if it's a situation of just someone in the building that shouldn't be there. And like I said, they can't neutralize the threat. And then access control badges without proper oversight are vulnerable to exploitation. The biggest thing is I can come in with my badge, I can swipe 3 times and bring 3 people in. If there's no one there to catch me, there's going to be no alarm going off for piggybacking because I'm using my badge 3 times. Now you could probably program that, but there's other ways to get in through piggybacking and tailgating and holding doors open. You got to have boots on the ground. Okay, there we go. So there's my hybrid model right there. So just like back at West Point, when I was speaking with my Army personnel and I had technology and advancements, I still need those boots on the ground. I need those security officers there, combined with that remote monitoring, with that new technology, to be able to neutralize any threats and mitigate concerns that I might have. So that physical presence on site, I talked about how we had that physical presence at our bank and the bank across the street got robbed. I talked about the physical presence that we had at the time before we upgraded our security at Fifth Third Bank, and what happened when our assailant went to the courthouse, saw what he saw there, didn't like it, and came to us. You want to make sure, and I hate to say this, but If you put that security in place, you will push those bank robbers, those violent people to other locations. That's why it's important. Capital D in deterrence right there is that boots on the ground. Real-time capabilities to neutralize threats and provide direction. I mean, a monitor, a camera is not going to be able to tell people what to do during a critical incident. You need trained officers who are going to give verbal direction to your employees and to make sure that real-time situational awareness is being fed back to the BSOC, the Bank Core Security Operations Center, so they can deploy the proper assets to neutralize your situation. Expanding security coverage and using cameras are great. Motion sensors. I have biometrics that are in my data centers, double authentication security. All these things are great technological advances that when it's combined with security, with boots on the ground, they work very effectively at keeping the bad people where they're supposed out of where they shouldn't be. Access control in internal and sensitive areas where guard coverage would be extremely common. If I had to put, like I said, if I had to put a guard at every one of my doors and entrance points within my data centers in certain areas within our building here where we have sensitive information, it would cost me so much money we wouldn't be able to make a profit as a bank. So once again, using that remote in combination with the boots keeps me having to put more guards on the premises, so I can use less guards and provide that same security, if not better. Insider threat, tracking employees. We do that quite often. We're not out to get people, but when we get an incident where we think someone's doing something they shouldn't be doing, having that access control, having those badge swipes, having the video of what they did and where they tried to go, all that comes together in an investigation and usually leads to the proper resolution. And then I complete non-criminal and criminal investigations. I do them here, and then I feed that information to law enforcement if it's a criminal situation, and then they will go ahead and remediate from there using the evidence that I provide. So I just want to wrap it up real quick. You got to know your threats. You got to know the threats that are prevalent at each one of the locations that you have. Then you have to, at that point, know what your corporate environment, security environment is, what's going on in your footprint. You take that together, you design your security, and you combine the boots on the ground with remote monitoring capabilities to be successful in mitigating the areas of responsibility that you have to overlook for your employees. I'll move it on, I guess, at this point, and I'll toss it off to Mark.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Dale, for having me on today. Great. I think we're going to segue really nicely, Frank, from what you touched on. Thanks to the Global Guardian team for including me today. Love working with these, forward-thinking partners, and a couple of things stood out, when Frank was speaking, and it's kind of, part of my introduction. We can switch to the next slide, kind of the introductory slide here. We're going to be talking about sort of feature focus versus performance focus. Frank was really nailing, the performance focused items. From the bullets, you'll see, we're going to talk about an opportunity to challenge the status quo, right? So that's all well and good, the technology is available and so on. But does the security team have the time and knowledge to deploy and select and choose the appropriate technology? So time and knowledge definitely key. And is the organization willing to adopt to change? Often a big issue. And we're going to seek a couple of opportunities to deliver security services a little bit differently. We can go to the first slide or the next slide, please. So, absolutely, technology to me, of course, it's my day-to-day, it's our day-to-day. When I'm talking to Andrew and team and so on, we're talking about technology opportunities, but they present opportunities, right? So we're speaking of them from a point of view of that there's a lot of current event day-to-day technology that can change how we deliver the security services today. Right? Not necessarily, people saying, oh, that's cutting edge or that's vaporware, right? It's things that are tried, tested and true. So millions or hundreds of thousands of hours out there operating and actually performing and tying into an overall security program. I'll probably say that a couple of times as we go. Definitely not a standalone. Enterprise security risk management is really pushing, security teams to show value. Right, to show, hey, where can we deploy resources? Which resources can we deploy? And it's even more critical today, right? We're really looking for looking for results. Frank touched on one of the Ds, but the 5 Ds that are listed up on the screen there, but technology plus an approach to drive all 5, and not just necessarily in the same old way as we're looking to secure locations. So what can devices do to allow for that higher trained or better trained individual, where we're spending, to Frank's point, spending a little bit more on that security officer, that we can get better performance on them? Well, what can we do with technology to take away from that? And then, of course, we can't forget today's economic climate, right? We're forced to show an ROI or return on investment day in, day out, and even more so than, if we take a big step back and kind of go pre-pandemic, but even more so today and with the current economic climate. Value plus, so we're looking really to drive the value of the security service team without impacting the risk profile, right? We can't just say, hey, we're going to put in cameras and then hope for the best on a response, or rely on, public law enforcement for response. We can't do that. And that, we're definitely challenged to do more with less. And the solutions around that are, hey, let's apply technology in the right way to be able to take care of that as we need to. And of course, I'll say it again, try, tested, and true technology, allowing for redundant, no failure allowed type environment. And, technology really gives us that, or the application or the proper application of technology really gives us that as we go forward. We can go to the next slide. Definitely not a be all and end all, as I've said, and we need people, we need service providers, and how we choose our service provider is absolutely critical. But we need service providers that are looking to that, one button approach, as Andrew mentioned. It's not, hey, this is the service that we offer, so you can pick and choose this service. It's no. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to get to? What is the performance that we need, not the different features that we're looking for? So partner of choice, to me, it's all about approach, capabilities, experience, who is on the team, how do they work with you, right? And then determining, whether or not that they're good at what they do, and good at applying those solutions to what you need. So the solution or resolution that you need. Compliance is definitely a big thing, right? I mean, I think we could do a 60 minutes. We could probably do 120 minutes just on compliance on different items. Different, whether that's, and I listed a couple of them here in my notes: Safety Act, SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2, ISO 27001. MDAA compliant or not? What kind of equipment are people applying out there? And, that's something that you definitely need to do research on, and not just say, hey, I'm looking for this standard because, I've heard about it or whatever. Make sure, again, it applies to what the solution is, or what's required. Offering, is the service provider offering everything, or are they trying to actually deliver, again, back to your solution and what you need to achieve? So as a security professional within an organization, you're there to drive certain results for the organization, right? Drive certain protection of assets to the organization, drive, certain analysis of threats and so on, and then be able to analyze and respond to those. What sort of qualifications and experience have they solved for the pain that you have currently, or maybe that you're experiencing? Right. Another question, or a good question to ask, is, are they adopting the latest technology, or are they innovating? Or are they just, sort of willy-nilly, out there saying, well, camera's a camera, we can just apply that as we need to. So disruptive innovation, to me, is something that is important when you're looking at the overall performance of, hey, what are we trying to achieve? And are we opening our horizons to, hey, how can we do this? How can we do this a little bit differently from today? And of course, then, it's all well and good to apply all these solutions, but how do they measure success? What are the different metrics and so on that get put in place? What can the system actually generate for you as you go through the program? And in the end, actually, the funny part is, considering what I do day to day, it has nothing really to do with the technology itself, or that specific item, or that specific piece. It has to do with the results, right? It has to do and how it's applied across a security program. So it's not about the technology at all. It's not about it at all, but again, it's about it. It's about all of it at the same time. As well. And we can switch to the next slide, please. So if we're looking ahead, and 2023 is going to be an interesting year, right? A lot is being spoken about, whether it's interest rates and so on. The good news is that the R is actually not for recession; it's for robot. And of course, I can't, get on a panel or get into a discussion with partners without talking a little bit, at least, about robots. And the fun part about this part is, there's some people, kind of roll their eyes, and others, get excited because they think, sci-fi, latest movie or whatever. But what is a robot, right? You have to ask yourself, is it something that represents a humanoid, right? Is it something that looks like a person but delivering things? Does a robot have to move for it to be a robot? I would argue that it doesn't necessarily need to move for it to be a robot. To me, being a robot is more about autonomous and remote services, autonomously responding to a situation as that first layer, right? Frank got into many different layers of response and different points, but a device can do that first layer, that first warning, to again not take on or take over too much of the resources of that human physical security officer that's well trained and more expensive on the site. Have a device do the basic and the mundane, right? Mobility is a part of it, and in certain cases, again, environment specific, mobility is going to be very important. Large fence lines, for example, massive parking lots to patrol, which would maybe require multiple people to do it. Well, why not have a either fixed or mobile device do that? But the important part in and around again, robotics or autonomous remote services is tying in that artificial intelligence to that accuracy and repeatability. So having that same thing or that same rule be applied the same way every single time, right? Time and time again, which of course allows for, I think I've said it already, but optimally deploying the human resources, and then having the technology really take over that kind of mundane type outcome. So if you need first aid, or if you need an armed response, you need a personal intervention, well, you're probably not going to put a robot on that, right? Or not yet anyway, maybe down the road, but that's again another discussion. We'll do this in a few years and we'll see. For that, you need that highly trained, well-trained security officer. But what about loitering alerts? Right? In an area that loitering has become a concern, why not have a device do those initial warnings, follow that up with a remote capability for specific warnings, and follow that up, with a human intervention as needed, right? The 5th D, of course, in the 5 Ds is that defend. How do you actually interact with that? If you go back to basic security functions like loitering and trespassing and so on, device can do the initial, warning and so on. Talk down can be done from a remote video monitoring or alert center, and then really take advantage of that autonomous response. Of course, it's all well and good, right? And you think about, hey, yeah, let's apply that to an organization. It comes down to appetite, whether the organization is willing to accept that kind of change. So change management becomes a key in any kind of technology sort of deployment and focus. And of course, when you're talking change management, all 3 components, in this case, people, process, and technology, none of them stand alone on their own. And I think, kind of closing comment, I guess, in terms of delivering more, understanding that return on the investment, and kind of pushing those results by marrying the different opportunities for physical security service, I think is where to go. I think we're going back to Dale.
Thank you, Mark. We had targeted to be right on this slide at 40 after the hour, and it's 39 minutes. So we are plus or minus here about a minute, which is great. Ultimately, that means we're going to have 20 full minutes for Q&A. My key takeaways here from listening to both speakers, I think we've clearly been incredibly consistent in our messaging between all 3 of us. Ultimately, before we go into Q&A, I think, again, I'll end where I started here. The threat is increasing. It is persistent. I am hopeful that the country will go back in a different direction from a crime standpoint in our major cities, but that's going to take time, and it takes budgets, and it takes people. And I think in a post-COVID world, the way we should view this is we're not going backwards. We're not going back. Like, we are where we're at, and we're going to have to work our way through this. But we're in the current environment is the current environment. You can't think that what worked 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago is going to work moving forward. It's a different environment with different constraints. I think, obviously, as you look at what's happening, and Frank touched on this a little bit, budgets are tight. The training for first responders and the turnover that's tied to that is extensive. It is incredibly hard, and we ask an enormous amount from our first responders. I think when you look at what we're asking them to do on a daily basis, we are asking them to resolve homelessness problems, mental illness, spousal abuse, crime, murder. I mean, it is overwhelming what we're asking our first responders to do. And I think ultimately, if you're waiting for the first responders to solve your problem at a corporate headquarters, it's simply not real. You've got to be aggressive in the way Frank has built his program, I believe, and that's why he's here, with that combination of what Mark's bringing with the technology. I just think that that solution is so wildly obvious to all of us at this point. I think there is a narrative about guards. You heard Frank has an 11% turnover rate. That's incredibly low. I mean, it's phenomenal in the industry, frankly. But you also heard he's paying for that, and he internally trains them. This is not point and shoot, and I have a vendor, and here's the contract, and we're done. If you want well-trained personnel, you have to own that, and you have to make them, in Frank's case, you have to make them understand the Fifth Third ethos, and there's a way. And that's not just a contract. And ultimately, my message out there to the audience is this: you get what you pay for with guards, number one. And two, if you don't bring them in and fully integrate them and make them part of the team and part of the ethos, you're destined to have failure. And then lastly, I think in the current environment, training your workforce and educating them on what technology does the firm have, how is it used, what's your expectation, and what does that mean for you at the individual level? And then understanding that you have to communicate. You can have the greatest pre-planned policies in the world. You can bring in consultants and they can build 300-page books on what you're going to do in an emergency. But if no one knows that other than the C-suite, and no one understands what their role is, you're guaranteed to fail. It really matters that you educate and train your workforce on these topics, because again, we're not going backward. I think we're in an environment where your workforce needs to know what happens in the office. They need to know what happens if they're a dispersed workforce, working from home. All these things now matter in a way they might not have a decade or 20 or 30 years ago. It's different. So I'll leave it at that. Andrew, we're looking forward. I saw a series of questions come in. We look forward to Q&A. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks. Great conversation and fantastic input. So far, so good. We'll start with the first question. Question is for Frank. As a security leader, what are your top priorities to managing a successful corporate security program?
Frank, you're muted, sir. There you go. There you go. We can hear you. Oh, go back. You had just unmuted. You'll see the little marker in the bottom left there. There you go. You're
technical difficulties up on the screen. Okay. So that being said, getting back to what I spoke about earlier about knowing your threats, I think the first thing to be a successful corporate leader in security is to know what threats you're facing, to understand those threats. And then on top of that, to be able to figure out what are the most probable threats that you have to try to mitigate. Now, I'll give you an example of that. When I first came here, I read a SWOT analysis, and it was of our old data center. And the person that wrote that years ago said the number one threat they were concerned about was that it was on the glide path at CVG, and potentially an aerial threat could be a threat to the destruction of our data within the data center. Now, obviously, that's probably true, but is that the most probable threat? Is an aerial attack? That being said, I'm not going to put SA7s or MANPADs, portable air defense systems on top of my building to defend against this when someone can park a truck and detonate like they did on Christmas Day in Nashville in front of the AT&T and switching station. So knowing your threats is important, and knowing what the real threats are that you're concerned about. Once you understand what your real threats are, and you know the ones that you face, then you have to look at the mitigation part, and that's putting countermeasures in place. And when you're doing that, you have to also look at cost. This is the corporate world. Things cost money, and you have to pick and choose which countermeasures you want to put in place. So once you know your threats, you find the probable threats, and then you go ahead and put the countermeasures that are cost effective and worth it to mitigate those threats. Now you're cooking as a corporate security director. Now it's just layering your security, training them, practicing. I always say, write it, and then you train it, and then you test it. And that's red teaming. So that's my premise. I write the post instructions, I write the security design, I deploy it, and then I want to go ahead and make sure they know it by training it to them. And once I feel comfortable, then I test it. And so I think that's how to be successful, is to keep those three components in place and design your security to fit your needs in a cost-effective way. I hope that answers the question.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Frank.
Yep.
We got a question from John Bullwinkle directed toward Mark. Can you talk a little bit about developing AI components available for remote guarding? And I'll throw a caveat on there. Examples, firearm detection, human object, the whole use case.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, great question. And to me, without that capability, without the capability of being able to dial into a situation remotely, you're losing a huge piece of that overall security service program, right? So yes, a device can respond autonomously first. So let's say a robot responds autonomously, but an alert needs to be pushed somewhere. So in a case, in every sort of day-to-day situation that we see, an alert gets pushed to a remote video monitoring station or center. I like to say remote alert monitoring, where there's something actually coming in worth looking at. It's not just looking at a camera for the sake of looking at a camera. I'm not looking at a feed for the sake of looking at a feed. And then, of course, the tie-in back to that artificial intelligence. What was recognized or what set the trigger off? So maybe, use case, it's back of a building where there shouldn't be people, or part of a building where there shouldn't be people after hours. After 2300, there shouldn't be anybody there. Human detection alert goes in, the remote monitoring center responds, and now can voice down, which is now the second layer of response. Right, to your point, Andrew, on the firearms detection, hey, a firearm has been detected, visible firearm has been detected, an alert gets pushed. A couple of questions there. Where does the alert go? Right, it can go to the remote center, which is one. It could and should go to the people on site, likely as well, for additional response or intervention. And the idea in both of those cases is time, right? That artificially that recognized event has provided additional time to the response team to interact with that situation.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Dale, coming your way. In an earlier slide, it represents a non-tipping scale where technology and humans are aligned. Can you explain that landscape? And in your opinion, what is the magic recipe?
Yeah, I think both speakers have kind of answered this, so I'll be very quick here. Ultimately, I think the quote unquote recipe or secret sauce in all of this is what both speakers have described, and Frank kind of brought it all together. I think when you prioritize based on a real threat, you make good decisions about what technology can assist with that, and then ensure you actually have stress tested, if you will. I think that's what Frank was indicating. Your security force, your workforce, that you have a real response. Because I think in corporate America, I see this constantly, where we apply a platform, whether that's human beings or technology in this case, and we sign the contract and we think it's great, but then we don't stress test it. And we don't realize that we're buying something we thought was going to do one thing in reality, when it's in the real world and it's being stressed, that it doesn't work. So I think ultimately There's no perfect answer here. I'm not going to tell you that it should be a 70-30 or 60-40 mix of human beings and security agents versus technology. I think it all goes back to your environment and what Frank described. But I do think that is the secret sauce, is bringing in the best and most recent technology and then applying it over your footprint and what the threat is. I think that is the best answer.
Thanks, Dale. Good answer. Got a question going to Frank, Delroy Russell. Frank, unless missed it, how do you monitor and detect lost, stolen access ID badges? Is this a combination of technology and personnel, or technology only?
It is a combination of both. What happens is our employees, if they lose their badge or if they misplace it or whatever temporarily, they report that, and then we will immediately shut that badge down. That's how we do it. Now, if we have an employee that we've decided that we'll no longer have a relationship with that employee at the bank, then we will immediately shut that badge down right away. We have a system in place to do that. So it can be done, triggered by both the termination of an employee, and it can also be triggered by a report to our security officers that someone has lost their badge. Temporary badge issues does go on if it's just misplaced, but they are informed that if they cannot locate that badge, and we know they have to turn that badge in at the end of every day. So a temporary badge is only good for one day. We deactivate it. So they come back looking for a temporary badge the second day, then we right then that sends up a red flag, and then we'll go ahead and deactivate that badge. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. Coming back your way, Dale, Julia Santana, question for the team. Currently, does GG Global Guardian offer capabilities for live streaming security video via cellular and satellite? Such option would involve hearing monitoring, recording of conversations, and physical surveillance, cell phone camera access to enhance safety, reliability, and level 1 of first response. If not, would the same be an area of consideration in the near future to offer clients moving assets and businesses?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. And I think the answer is this will only get more sophisticated as technology continues to merge. So I'm going to pause there. I'm actually going to pass to Mark, because I think, Mark, you might have a more in-depth view of this. But my view of this, Mark, and I'll hand off to you, is that all of this is going to move exponentially faster as the technology now is in software development is moving so quickly, that I do think this is an enormous part of the future moving forward. Mark, comment on that, please.
Yeah, Dale, I mean, I agree 100%. It's moving quick, and it's going to move even quicker and faster. To me, a blocker, and something that we talk about kind of fairly regularly, is more around adoption, right? What are people willing to accept today? Of course, there are a slew of rules. I heard the question about sort of audio recording and so on. So a bunch of things to be careful with. But right now, a little bit of a choke point is some of that cellular data consumption, right? I mean, that's something that RAD's addressed on certain of its platforms, but it's definitely something that's going to keep going. And I think what it does is it kind of turns around a lot of the sort of project style, implementations, right? When you can now drop cellular, or you can now drop solar, on some of these situations, you've just taken out a whole bunch of project management style building type stuff.
Yeah. And I'll end with this, Andrew, on the question. Ultimately, I think Mark really hit on something here. Every corporate general counsel and the ethos of the firm matters. We have to work through, and we do this every week, we are working through privacy issues. This is a big deal. Ultimately, I would say, in simple terms, the cyberspace has been dealing with this for quite some time, meaning if you issue a cell phone, a laptop, a desktop now to your remote workers, and your employees are working from home or working in the office, what is that firm authorized to do with what's happening on those platforms? We've been dealing with that for 11 years. I think that's very standard in the industry, if you will, in the cyberspace. Now with what Mark is going, that path Mark is on with the development of technology, the privacy issues will come up. And ultimately, these will be judgment calls on how aggressive and what the ethos of that firm is willing to do, and where's the line for privacy and where's it not. Because there's going to be an enormous amount of information moving forward that's going to be captured in the workplace or outside of the workplace based on the development of technology. So I think there is a cautionary tale there for sure, and it has to be managed in a very thoughtful way. But make no mistake, everything around us in our lives is now monitored in a way I don't think most people truly understand. And I think as you listen to Frank, whether it's a bank robbery or he's got an irate customer somewhere at an office or a branch, it's amazing what's now being picked up. And this goes back to where's the line? So there's no perfect answer, but I think all of this leads to a very thoughtful discussion in trying to balance security and safety and privacy.
Perfect. Thank you. Very well put. Coming back to you, Mark, on something you just said, you were speaking on cloud solutions. So what are your thoughts on cloud solutions? Are they real or are they simply just a LTE nightmare for telecom carriers?
Yeah, I think LTE nightmare is probably the choke point in a lot of transmission issues, right? I mean, the volume of that data kind of being pushed over cellular. Again, it's something that is definitely manageable, right? And it's part of an approach. If someone says, "Hey, I'm going to push all your video over LTE," you're definitely going to be looking at some kind of an interesting bill. An example, with RAD devices, thumbnails get pushed over into cloud, and then actual live video and so on is stored in a different way. So there are definitely options today in how it can happen. To me, cloud is not, again, just like anything else, right? A cautionary tale, to use one of Dale's comments a second ago. It's not the be all and end all, and it needs to be organization specific, right? I mean, a lot of things need to be considered, but definitely a solution that will allow for increased flexibility over time. Definitely out there.
Thank you, boss. Go with our last question. Send it over to Dale. In your experience, in your past, especially with foreign affairs, is crime primarily a domestic problem, or are we truly dealing with a global issue?
Yeah, so now I'll ask Frank to come on this too. Look, I've lived around the world. I consider myself a global citizen. I would tell you that yes, and I said this I'll kind of reiterate what I said earlier. I'm 54. There are things going on domestically here in this country I never anticipated happening in my lifetime that I've seen in other parts of the world. So from that standpoint, I would say from living around the world and being in these different markets that have a much more intensive crime issue and in conflict zones, I would say that this is 100% global. Make no mistake, the United States is not unique here. You can go and Google these global kind of crime stats across the world. And I spoke at a conference last week in Athens, Greece, and I had to speak about Mexico. And this is not a hit on Mexico, but they have, if you look at in concert with the United States, their increase in murder rate has skyrocketed over the last 3 years. Now, they have different reasons for that in some cases, and some of it's the same. Ultimately, what you cannot dismiss is that COVID created literally global financial carnage. Entire industries, entire supply chains were shut down, and you had more people unemployed. And in markets where you don't have a robust, wealthy government like Western Europe or the United States or Canada and things like that, if you didn't have that option because the government just is not as well formed, is not as efficient financially, and they couldn't create safety nets for their population, you saw an explosion in crime. So make no mistake, everything we talked about, yes, we're very myopic and focused on the United States. And Frank talked a lot about Cincinnati and Chicago and the world he's living. These are real issues. And I don't think this is going away in the United States overnight. But my point is, make no mistake, this is global. This is not unique to the United States by any means. Now, the gun culture in the United States is a different kind of conversation. But make no mistake, crime as a whole, globally in almost all the markets around the world, saw a material increase. This is a global issue. Frank, do you want to comment on that to close us out? We've got just a couple minutes, but do you have an opinion on that just from your background also?
Well, Dale, thank God that all of my banks are located domestically here in the United States. But with that being said, I concur 100% with you. I traveled to several other foreign countries. Mexico being one of them with my chief executive officer, because one of the things I do is executive protection on top of the physical security. As a matter of fact, I contracted with your organization to provide me with support overseas. And I know that the cartel problem in Mexico is bad.
Yeah.
It's becoming ruthless. There's a lot of money to be made, and they're making more money every day with the situation we have here in the United States. So I would say I concur 100% with the global movement of criminal activity increasing in the United States as well. And that's why as security individuals, we have to be really good at what we do.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I just want to thank our guests, Frank Loveridge and Mark Fulmer. Appreciate you taking time to speak with us. Thanks, Dale, for your input as well and for being on the call. Just want to say thank you to everyone who attended. Hope that you learned something valuable today and something that you can take away. And we hope to see you on our final webinar this year, which will be Global Affairs, attending on December 14th. So keep it on your calendars.